Have you ever stepped into an elevator in a Chinese neighborhood and noticed something strange? The buttons jump from 3 to 5, like the fourth floor never existed. Or you book a hotel room and there is 503 and 505, and somehow no 504. That is not a building glitch. It is a cultural choice, and it all traces back to one tiny number with a huge shadow, the number 4. The core reason is linguistic. In Mandarin, the word for is si, and the word for death is si. They are different words, but they sound similar enough that the association is hard to unsee once you notice it. The main difference is tone, and tone is not always crisp in real life. People talk fast, they rush, they are on the phone, and even when you can hear the difference, your brain still links the sound to the idea. In Cantonese, the overlap is even tighter. 4 is sis, and death is sif, again, separated mainly by tone. That is why the superstition is often described as especially visible in Cantonese-speaking communities. A Medical Journal of Australia article notes that in Hong Kong, this belief is obvious in the built environment, where some high-rises have missing floors like 4, 14, and 24. So yes, it starts as wordplay. But once a number feels like it is whispering death, people start treating it like a bad sign. And that takes us to the bigger cultural system behind it. Chinese number symbolism leans heavily on homophones and near homophones. Because many words can share similar sounds, numbers become shortcuts for meaning. Some digits feel lucky because they echo words tied to prosperity or longevity. Others feel unlucky because they echo words tied to loss or death. Over time, this becomes etiquette, not just belief. For example, giving 4 of something can feel like sending the message death, so people avoid it in gifts, especially around weddings and holidays. Even if someone does not personally believe, they may still avoid 4 out of respect for family norms or to keep things from feeling awkward. Institutions adapt to. Britannica notes that in some Chinese buildings, the 4th and 14th floors are labeled with substitutes. Much like how some Western buildings avoid labeling a 13th floor, the building does not change, but the numbering does because demand changes. Now, let's look at the real-world ripple effects, because they show up in places you would not expect. In real estate, skipping 4 is a low-effort way to match buyer preferences. Developers can relabel a floor as 3A or jump to 5, and suddenly the unit is easier to sell. That is why you see the pattern most clearly in high-rises. Hotels and hospitals where room and floor numbers are visible every day. The same logic appears in phone numbers and license plates, especially in places where people can choose or upgrade number patterns. A sequence is not just a number. It becomes a tiny piece of identity that goes on business cards, storefronts, and social media. And this is not just anecdotal. A Harvard Fairbanks Center post explains how researchers used the superstition about 4 to study a Beijing license plate restriction policy. Because many people tried to avoid plates ending in 4, very few cars had that ending. So on days when 4 plates were restricted, the policy had less effect. The post reports measurable differences early on, including higher congestion, higher air pollution, and increases in certain ambulance calls on those for restriction days. So the number 4 can shape behavior at scale, simply because enough people make the same small choice. But the story is not only about what people avoid, it is also about what they pursue instead. If 4 feels negative, 8 often feels positive. In many Chinese communities, 8 is associated with prosperity. So it becomes a good number to have in an address, a phone number, or a license plate. Once that preference is widespread, markets respond. A University of British Columbia economics paper, looking at close to 117,000 home sales in Greater Vancouver, found a clear pricing pattern. Houses with address numbers ending in 4 sold at about a 2.2% discount, while those ending in 8 sold at about a 2.5% premium, especially in neighborhoods with higher concentrations of ethnic Chinese residents. That is the key point. This does not require every buyer to care. It only requires enough buyers to care that sellers and developers start designing around it. Symbolism becomes part of the product, which leads to the final question. How should we understand this today without turning it into a stereotype? Not all Chinese people avoid 4, and the strength of the superstition varies by region, dialect, and generation. Some people treat it as a joke, some people do not care. And in Mandarin-speaking settings, the tone difference between 4 and death can make the link feel weaker than it does in Cantonese-heavy contexts. But superstitions often live in the why risk it corner of the brain. Someone might ignore a random 4 on a receipt, yet still avoid it when choosing an apartment, picking a wedding date, or selecting a phone number. The cost of avoidance is low, and the emotional comfort is high. So when you hear Chinese people avoid the number 4, the deeper story is not fear of math. It is language shaping emotion, culture turning that emotion into etiquette, and markets reinforcing the pattern over time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video and found it valuable, I'm really glad you stuck around. See you in the next episode.